Sheriff Calloway's ultimatum froze the blood in Lizzie's veins as his calloused hand extended toward her trembling fingers. Take his protection and become his wife, or take the iron bars of his jail cell and forfeit her freedom forever. The notorious Phantom Thief had escaped countless lawmen across 3 counties, but something in the sheriff's piercing blue eyes told her running was no longer an option. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The September sun beat down mercilessly on Copper Creek, baking the dusty main street and sending most sensible townsfolk seeking refuge in the shade. Sheriff Wade Calloway stood on the weathered boardwalk outside his office, thumbing the silver pocket watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's before him. The timepiece was one of his few prized possessions, a family heirloom engraved with the Calloway name and a reminder of the legacy he carried as a lawman. 3 generations of Calloways had kept order in Copper Creek, and Wade took that responsibility as seriously as the badge pinned to his chest. At 34, Wade had the weathered look of a man who'd seen his share of troubles. His eyes, a deep blue that reminded folks of mountain lakes, surveyed the town with the practiced vigilance of someone accustomed to anticipating trouble before it announced itself. The lines at the corners of those eyes had been etched there by squinting into the sun, and by the weight of decisions no man should have to make. He snapped the watch closed and tucked it into his vest pocket, adjusting his gun belt out of habit. Something felt off today. He couldn't put his finger on it, but years of enforcing the law had given him an instinct for danger, like the way the air charged before a lightning storm. The same prickling sensation crawled up his spine now as he scanned the quiet street. "Sheriff!" Deputy Miller's urgent voice broke through his thoughts. The young deputy was hurrying toward him, all gangly limbs and earnest expression. "Telegram from Silver Junction. There's been another stagecoach robbery, same method as the others." Wade frowned, taking the telegram and scanning its contents. "The Phantom," he muttered. It was a ridiculous name for a thief, but one that had caught on across 3 counties after 6 stagecoach robberies in as many months. Always the same approach. A lone figure appearing suddenly on the road, face concealed, demanding valuables with surprising courtesy before disappearing like smoke. "They're saying it's headed our way next," Miller continued, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "The Copper Creek Silverton stage carries the mining payroll next Tuesday." Wade folded the telegram deliberately. "Then we'll be ready. Get word to the stage company. I want 2 extra guards and I'll ride shotgun myself." "Yes, sir." Miller hesitated. "Sheriff, they're saying something else about the Phantom, saying maybe it's not a man at all." That caught Wade's attention. "What do you mean?" "Passengers on this last job, one of them thought the voice sounded like a woman, said the Phantom was small-framed too, despite the oversized coat and hat." Wade's eyebrows rose. A female stagecoach robber? It seemed unlikely, but it would explain how the thief managed to vanish so completely after each robbery. No one was looking for a woman. "Interesting," he said finally. "Doesn't change our plans. Woman or not, the Phantom's going to find more than they bargained for in Copper Creek." Little did Wade know just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Elizabeth Lizzie Harrington adjusted her hat in the grimy mirror of the Wayfarers Inn, studying her reflection critically. She had arrived in Copper Creek just yesterday, taking a room under the name Miss Elizabeth Hart, supposedly a seamstress looking to establish a shop in a growing frontier town. The story was plausible enough. Her fingers were indeed nimble with needle and thread, skills her grandmother had insisted upon despite the family's wealth. Of course, that wealth was long gone now, along with the Charleston mansion and the family's good name. All swept away when her father's railroad investments collapsed, leaving nothing but debt and shame behind. Her parents hadn't survived the scandal, succumbing within months of each other to what the doctor called heart failure. But what Lizzie knew was really heartbreak. She had made her way west with what little remained, determined to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. The stagecoach robberies had started as desperation, a way to survive when her meager savings ran out. But with each success, Lizzie had grown bolder, more confident. She took only from those who could afford it, never using violence, always maintaining a certain civility that had become her trademark. The Phantom, they called her. The name made her smile. If only they knew the ghost haunting the mountain passes was a 26-year-old woman raised to pour tea and play the pianoforte at society gatherings. Lizzie pinned her chestnut hair carefully, tucking errant strands beneath her hat. Her green eyes, which her father had once called changeable as April weather, were her most distinguishing feature, so she was careful to keep them shadowed beneath her hat brim during robberies. The rest of her appearance was unremarkable enough, pleasant but not beautiful, with a sprinkling of freckles across her nose that had been the despair of her mother. "Miss Hart?" A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Letter for you at the front desk." "Thank you," she called, puzzled. No one knew she was here. She straightened her simple blue dress and made her way downstairs to the hotel's small lobby. The letter was addressed in an elegant hand she didn't recognize. Breaking the seal, she found a single sheet of expensive stationery inside. "I know who you are and why you're in Copper Creek. Meet me at Widow Jensen's tea room at 2 o'clock if you wish to avoid complications. Come alone." Lizzie's blood ran cold. Someone knew. But who, and how much did they know? Was it a trap? She glanced at the clock behind the reception desk. It was just past noon. She had 2 hours to decide whether to meet this mysterious correspondent or gather her belongings and flee town immediately. Her hand drifted to the small derringer hidden in her pocket. She wasn't defenseless, but neither was she a fool. Copper Creek was supposed to be the last job, one final stage robbery to give her enough to start a legitimate business somewhere far away. The mining payroll would set her up for a new life, one where Elizabeth Harrington could finally stop running. But nothing was ever simple, was it? She tucked the note into her pocket and decided a walk might clear her head. She needed to see the town anyway, to learn its rhythms and escape routes. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, the sun momentarily blinded her. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking directly at the sheriff's office across the street. A tall figure emerged from the doorway, and Lizzie's breath caught. Even from this distance, she could tell the sheriff was a formidable man. Broad-shouldered and vigilant, he stood surveying his domain with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. As if sensing her gaze, he turned in her direction, and for a terrifying moment, Lizzie thought he could see right through her careful disguise. Then a young deputy rushed up to him with some urgent message, drawing his attention away. Lizzie exhaled slowly and continued her walk, but a new worry settled in her stomach. The sheriff of Copper Creek didn't look like a man easily fooled. If she was going to pull off one last robbery, she would need all her wits about her. Little did she know that the silver pocket watch gleaming in the sheriff's vest would soon become both her downfall and her salvation. Widow Jensen's tea room occupied a small corner building at the edge of Copper Creek's respectable district. Its lace curtains and painted sign promised a touch of civilization in the rough-hewn frontier town. Lizzie arrived 5 minutes before 2, deliberately choosing a table that afforded a clear view of both the entrance and the back door. The few patrons, mostly merchants' wives and the occasional miner's sweetheart, paid her little mind as she ordered tea with a steady voice that belied her racing heart. The widow herself, a plump woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, brought the tea personally. "You're new in town," she observed, not a question but a statement of fact. Nothing escaped notice in places like Copper Creek. "Yes, I arrived yesterday. I'm considering opening a seamstress shop," Lizzie replied with the practiced ease of someone who had reinvented herself many times. The widow nodded approvingly. "We could use one. Most ladies here send to Silver Junction for their finery, and the waiting is simply dreadful." She leaned closer with a conspiratorial smile. "Though I hear Sheriff Calloway's sister is quite handy with a needle. Does beautiful embroidery." Lizzie's ears pricked at the sheriff's name. "The sheriff has family here?" Information was currency, and she'd just received an unexpected deposit. "Just his sister, Rebecca, sweet girl, teaches at the schoolhouse. Their parents passed some years back, influenza. The sheriff practically raised her after that." Widow Jensen straightened as the bell above the door chimed. "Ah, more customers. Enjoy your tea, dear." Lizzie sipped slowly, watching the entrance. At precisely 2 o'clock, a woman in an elegant plum-colored dress entered the tea room. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and the refined bearing of someone accustomed to deference. Their eyes met across the room, and without hesitation the woman approached Lizzie's table. "Miss Hart, I presume?" The woman's voice carried a hint of the East Coast, not unlike Lizzie's own carefully concealed accent. "You have me at a disadvantage," Lizzie replied cautiously. "Marguerite Astor," the woman offered, seating herself without invitation. "Widow of James Astor, though that name likely means nothing to you." But it did. James Astor had been one of her father's business partners, one of the few who'd emerged from the railroad collapse with his fortune intact. Lizzie maintained her neutral expression with effort. "You're a long way from Charleston, Miss Harrington," Mrs. Astor continued in a low voice. Lizzie's hand tightened around her teacup. "I believe you've confused me with someone else." "We both know I haven't." Mrs. Astor's eyes, sharp and knowing, held hers. "I recognized you the moment you stepped off the stage yesterday. Your mother and I were schoolgirls together. You have her chin and her talent for deception." Lizzie set down her cup to hide the trembling of her hands. "What do you want?" "Direct." "Good. I've no patience for games." Mrs. Astor glanced around before continuing. "I want my husband's pocket watch. James always carried it, gold with a distinctive engraving of a sailing ship. It was in his possession when the stage was robbed near Silverton 2 months ago." "And what makes you think I—" "Please. Your activities as the Phantom are of no interest to me beyond this one item." Mrs. Astor's composed facade cracked slightly. "That watch contains a locket with the only image I have of our daughter. She died of fever when she was 6. The monetary value is nothing compared to what it holds." For the first time since beginning her career as a thief, Lizzie felt genuine shame. She remembered the robbery, a portly businessman who'd surrendered a gold watch without protest. She'd sold it in Silver Junction to a jeweler who asked no questions. "I no longer have it," Lizzie admitted softly. Mrs. Astor's face fell. "Where is it now?" "I sold it to Linden's Jewelry in Silver Junction about 7 weeks ago." Hope rekindled in Mrs. Astor's eyes. "Then there's still a chance. Linden holds items at least 2 months before altering them." She fixed Lizzie with a stern gaze. "You will help me recover it. And if I refuse, then I speak to Sheriff Calloway about the striking resemblance between Miss Elizabeth Hart and the description of the Phantom." Mrs. Astor smiled thinly. "I understand he's quite determined to make an arrest." Checkmate. Lizzie considered her options, which were painfully few. "What exactly do you propose?" "Simple. We travel to Silver Junction tomorrow to recover the watch. My finances are limited, but I can afford to buy it back if it's still intact." "And afterwards?" "Afterwards, I never saw Elizabeth Harrington in Copper Creek, just a forgettable seamstress who decided the town wasn't to her liking." Mrs. Astor rose gracefully. "The stage leaves at 8. Don't be late." As the widow departed, Lizzie sat motionless, her tea growing cold. Her carefully laid plans were unraveling, and yet the thought of recovering that watch, of returning something precious rather than taking it away, it tugged at a part of her soul she'd tried to silence these past desperate years. Across town, Sheriff Wade Calloway was conducting an inspection of the stagecoach route where the Copper Creek Silverton stage would travel. The winding mountain road offered numerous perfect ambush points, blind curves, narrow passages between sheer rock faces, dense stands of pine where a person could hide unseen until the last moment. "What do you think, Sheriff?" Deputy Miller asked, scanning the terrain with youthful intensity. Wade dismounted, studying the ground. "I think our Phantom has a pattern. Never hits in the same place twice, always chooses spots with at least 2 escape routes, and prefers afternoon stages when the sun will be in the driver's eyes." He pointed to a bend in the road ahead. "That's where I'd do it. Sun will be westward come Tuesday. Driver will be half blinded coming around that curve, and those rocks provide cover." "So we set up an ambush for the ambusher?" Miller asked eagerly. "Not exactly." Wade remounted his horse. "The Phantom's careful, too careful to walk into an obvious trap. No, we'll need to let this play out almost like normal." "Almost?" "I'll be on that stage, but not as myself." Wade's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the landscape. Time our friend learned that some treasures are too dangerous to steal. That evening, as Lizzie packed her small valise for the journey to Silver Junction, Sheriff Calloway sat in his modest home reviewing reports from neighboring counties. Each Phantom robbery was methodical, each victim describing similar details. A slight figure in oversized clothes, a soft-spoken voice that some thought feminine, an almost apologetic manner despite the leveled pistol. What puzzled Wade wasn't the robberies themselves. He'd dealt with plenty of thieves in his career. But the selectivity. The Phantom only took portable valuables, watches, rings, necklaces, and money. No interest in mail pouches or larger shipments. It suggested someone who traveled light and needed items easily converted to cash. The sheriff's eyes fell on his father's pocket watch, resting on the table beside the reports. He picked it up, running his thumb over the worn silver case. 3 generations of Calloways had carried it into danger. Now it would serve again, as bait for a ghost. Dawn painted the mountains gold as Lizzie waited beside the stage office, her valise clutched tightly in gloved hands. The morning air carried a bite that promised autumn would soon claim the high country. She'd spent a restless night weighing her options, but ultimately decided Mrs. Astor's proposal was her least dangerous path forward. Recover the watch, then disappear, perhaps to California or even Oregon territory. Yet something about Copper Creek tugged at her. Maybe it was the town's determined dignity despite its rough edges, so different from the calculating society she'd once known. Or perhaps it was simply fatigue from years of running. "You look contemplative this morning," Mrs. Astor observed, appearing beside her with quiet elegance. "Having second thoughts?" "Merely considering future prospects," Lizzie replied carefully. "A wise occupation." Mrs. Astor's gaze swept over the awakening town. "I've always found that looking forward serves better than dwelling on what's behind." The stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust, interrupting their conversation. The driver, a leathery man with a perpetual squint, secured their luggage while they boarded. To Lizzie's dismay, they weren't the only passengers. A traveling salesman with an ostentatious waistcoat and a young couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other, despite their obvious newlywed status, completed the party. As the stage lurched into motion, Lizzie caught sight of Sheriff Calloway emerging from the jailhouse across the street. Even at this distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. For an unsettling moment, his eyes seemed to lock with hers through the coach window. Then the stage rounded a corner, and Copper Creek began to fall away behind them. 4 hours to Silver Junction," the driver called back. "Road's been quiet lately, but keep your eyes open. That Phantom's still about somewhere." The salesman clutched his sample case closer. "Heard tell the sheriff's planning something special for that bandit. Might already be caught by time we return." Mrs. Astor raised an eyebrow at Lizzie, who maintained her composure despite the irony. "What's so special about this Phantom?" she asked innocently. "Lady, where you been?" The salesman warmed to his subject. 6 robberies in 6 months, never fires a shot, never caught. Some say it's a woman, if you can believe that. Sheriff Calloway's made catching this ghost his personal mission. Is the sheriff as formidable as he appears? Lizzie inquired, ignoring Mrs. Astor's warning glance. Wade Calloway? The salesman laughed. Ma'am, there's outlaws who'd rather face a firing squad than cross him. Man tracked a murderer through blizzard conditions last winter, brought him in half frozen but alive, fair as summer daylight in his judgments, but hard as iron when crossed. Lizzie fell silent, troubled by this description of the man whose jurisdiction she'd violated. Most lawmen she'd encountered were either corrupt or incompetent. A sheriff with both principles and ability presented complications she hadn't anticipated. The journey passed slowly, the stage swaying rhythmically as it climbed through mountain passes and descended into pine-shadowed valleys. Midway through the journey, they stopped at a way station to change horses and allow passengers a brief respite. While the others stretched their legs, Lizzie found herself alone with Mrs. Astor beside a small stream behind the station. You seem unusually interested in Sheriff Calloway, Mrs. Astor observed, voice neutral but eyes sharp. Merely gathering information. Lizzie splashed cool water on her face. Knowledge is survival. And attraction isn't. There was something knowing in the older woman's tone. Lizzie straightened, affronted. I assure you, please, I was young once too. Mrs. Astor's expression softened unexpectedly. He reminds me a little of James, my husband, that same steadiness, that sense of purpose. For the first time, Lizzie wondered about this widow and her story. You loved him very much. With everything I had, Mrs. Astor fingered a cameo at her throat, which is why I'll do whatever necessary to recover that watch. The moment of vulnerability passed, her features hardening again. Remember our agreement, the watch for your freedom. Back in Copper Creek, Wade Calloway sat across from Marcus Sullivan, president of the Copper Creek Mining Company and the man whose payroll would be on Tuesday's stage. I don't like it, Sullivan declared, drumming manicured fingers against Wade's desk. Using actual gold as bait? What if your plan fails? That's my miner's wages you're gambling with. Your miner's wages are precisely what the Phantom would be stealing if we don't set this trap, Wade countered. Besides, we won't be using the full payroll, just enough to make it convincing. Sullivan's mustache twitched with annoyance. And you're certain you can identify this ghost? I've studied every report, every witness statement. I know how the Phantom thinks. Wade leaned forward. This thief is methodical, intelligent, and averse to violence. Those characteristics make for a predictable pattern. What makes you so sure they'll hit this particular stage? Wade's smile was grim. Because I've made sure word has spread about a special shipment. The Phantom's careful, but no thief can resist high-value, low-risk targets. The mining payroll is too tempting. Sullivan reluctantly nodded. Very well, but I'll hold you personally responsible if anything goes wrong. He rose to leave, then hesitated. Then, one more thing, is it true what they're saying, that the Phantom might be a woman? Does it matter? Wade asked. Well, I mean, what would you do? Surely you wouldn't hang a woman. Wade's expression remained impassive. Justice doesn't care what's beneath the mask, Sullivan. Neither do I. After Sullivan departed, Wade unlocked his desk drawer and removed a small leather pouch. Inside lay several gold nuggets, his personal contribution to the trap. Alongside them was a folded wanted poster for the Phantom, the face a blank beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He picked up his father's pocket watch, opening it to reveal the inscription inside. To Samuel Calloway, May time served justice, 1851. The watch had never left his father's possession until the day he died tracking a bank robber through Red Rock Canyon. Wade had been 17, suddenly responsible for both his father's legacy and his 12-year-old sister. The watch had become his talisman, a reminder of duty and sacrifice. Now it would serve a different purpose, as bait for a clever thief who had evaded capture too long. Wade snapped the case closed and tucked the watch into his vest pocket. Then he began methodically checking his revolver, ensuring each chamber was loaded and clean. The Phantom might abhor violence, but Sheriff Wade Calloway wasn't taking any chances. In Silver Junction, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the bustling mining town, Lizzie and Mrs. Astor stood before Linden's Jewelry. The modest storefront belied the valuable merchandise within, and hopefully, one particular gold pocket watch containing memories more precious than gold. The bell above Linden's Jewelry jingled as they entered, announcing their presence to the thin, spectacled man behind the glass counter. Lizzie let Mrs. Astor take the lead, hanging back to observe the shop's layout. Old habits died hard, and she noted the rear exit, the cabinet locks, the small derringer undoubtedly hidden beneath the counter. Once she might have cataloged these details for a different purpose. "Good afternoon, ladies," the jeweler greeted them, adjusting his spectacles. "How may I assist you today?" Mrs. Astor stepped forward with dignified purpose. "I'm seeking a specific pocket watch that may have come into your possession approximately 7 weeks ago. Gold, with the engraving of a sailing ship on the case." The jeweler's expression remained professionally neutral, but Lizzie caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. "May I ask your interest in this item?" "It belonged to my late husband." Mrs. Astor's voice remained steady. "It was lost during our travels. I've recently learned it may have been sold to your establishment." "I see." He studied Mrs. Astor for a long moment. "We do occasionally purchase items with, shall we say, uncertain provenance. Our policy is discretion in all transactions." "I understand completely," Mrs. Astor replied. "I'm prepared to pay generously for its return, no questions asked." The jeweler disappeared into a back room, leaving Lizzie and Mrs. Astor in tense silence. Lizzie's thoughts raced. What if the watch had already been melted down or sold? What would Mrs. Astor do then? More pressingly, what would Mrs. Astor do to her? The minutes stretched uncomfortably before the jeweler returned, holding a small velvet pouch. "You're in luck, madam. The piece has quite unique craftsmanship. I held it aside for a special buyer." Mrs. Astor's composure cracked slightly, her hand trembling as she reached for the pouch. From it, she withdrew a gleaming gold watch. The sailing ship engraving caught the light as she turned it over, her fingers working the clasp with practiced ease. Inside, nestled against the watch face, was a tiny hinged compartment. Mrs. Astor opened it to reveal a miniature portrait of a golden-haired child with laughing eyes. Her breath caught audibly. "Caroline," she whispered so softly Lizzie barely heard it. The naked emotion on the widow's face made Lizzie look away, a strange tightness in her throat. She had stolen more than gold that day on the stagecoach. She had taken this woman's last physical connection to her dead child. The jeweler cleared his throat. The price would be $120, considering the craftsmanship and gold content. Mrs. Astor nodded without haggling, her eyes never leaving the tiny portrait. She counted out the bills, nearly all she had brought, Lizzie realized, and passed them to the jeweler, who accepted them with a slight bow. "A pleasure doing business with you, madam." His eyes slid to Lizzie, something knowing in his gaze that made her skin prickle. Safe travels back to Copper Creek. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Junction's main street. Mrs. Astor clutched the watch to her chest, her earlier poise momentarily abandoned. "Thank you," she said unexpectedly, turning to Lizzie. "I know you didn't do this willingly, but without you, I might never have found it." Discomfited by gratitude she didn't deserve, Lizzie replied, "Our business is concluded then?" Mrs. Astor composed herself, tucking the watch securely into her handbag. Almost. We return to Copper Creek tonight, and tomorrow you quietly leave town. Then our paths need never cross again. Tonight. Lizzie hadn't anticipated returning so quickly. The next stage isn't until morning. There's an evening freight wagon returning with supplies for the general store. The driver will take passengers for an extra $1. Mrs. Astor's tone brooked no argument. I prefer to conclude our arrangement as swiftly as possible. 4 hours later, they sat among crates of canned goods and dry goods, the wagon's wooden bench unforgiving as they jolted along the mountain road. Night had fallen, and lanterns swinging from the wagon cast eerie, shifting shadows on the rocky walls rising beside them. Lizzie stared into the darkness, mind churning with plans and doubts. She had intended to make the mining payroll her final score before retiring from her brief criminal career. Now that opportunity was slipping away, yet she felt strangely relieved. Perhaps it was time to try a different path. You're very quiet, Mrs. Astor observed, breaking the silence between them. Just thinking about tomorrow, Lizzie replied honestly. Where will you go? Lizzie shrugged. Oregon, maybe, or San Francisco. Mrs. Astor studied her in the flickering lantern light. You're an educated young woman from a good family. Why choose this life? The question hung between them, deceptively simple, yet impossibly complex. Lizzie had asked herself the same thing during countless sleepless nights. When my father's business collapsed, it wasn't just money we lost, she finally said. It was security, respect, identity, everything. The men who ruined him walked away wealthy while he died penniless. Her voice hardened. I decided to balance the scales in my own way. By becoming a thief? By taking from those who could afford to lose. Lizzie met the older woman's gaze directly. I never hurt anyone. Except you did. Mrs. Astor touched her handbag where the watch rested. Not physically, perhaps, but there are many kinds of wounds. The truth of those words settled uncomfortably in Lizzie's chest as the wagon continued its journey through the mountain night. Back in Copper Creek, Sheriff Calloway sat with his sister Rebecca at her small kitchen table, the remnants of dinner between them. At 29, Rebecca had their mother's gentle features but their father's stubborn chin and his unwavering moral compass. It's dangerous, Wade, she said, pouring more coffee into his cup. Riding that stage knowing there's going to be a robbery attempt. That's the job, Becca. He added a spoonful of sugar, stirring slowly. Besides, I've dealt with worse than a thief who's never fired a shot. That's what worries me. Father always said the most dangerous outlaws are the ones smart enough to avoid violence until they're cornered. Wade smiled wryly. You remember too much of his lectures. One of us had to. Her expression softened. I just don't want you taking unnecessary risks. I'll have Miller and 2 guards from the mining company riding Outrider, plus I'll be armed. He patted the pocket where their father's watch rested. And I've got my lucky charm. Rebecca's eyes widened. You're using Father's watch as bait? Wade, that's all we have left of him. Which is exactly why the Phantom won't be able to resist it, he explained. It'll be on full display when I pull it out to check the time just before the ambush point. Then when our ghost appears, what if something goes wrong? Wade reached across the table to squeeze his sister's hand. Nothing will go wrong. By this time tomorrow, the Phantom will be behind bars, and Father's watch will be back in my pocket where it belongs. Later that night, as Copper Creek settled into uneasy slumber, 2 women arrived on a freight wagon, dust-covered and weary. One carried a precious recovered memory, the other the weight of decisions that had led her down a path she never intended to travel. And somewhere between them, the fate of a silver pocket watch that would soon bring thief and sheriff into a confrontation neither could fully anticipate. Morning came too quickly for Lizzie. She had slept fitfully at the Wayfarer's Inn, dreams filled with stagecoaches, pocket watches, and the penetrating blue eyes of Sheriff Calloway. Her original plan had been to scout the mining company offices today, gauging security and confirming the payroll schedule. Instead, she was packing her meager belongings, preparing to flee before her luck ran out completely. A soft knock at her door startled her. Hand instinctively moving to the derringer in her pocket, she called, "Who is it?" "Telegram for Miss Hart," came the clerk's voice. She opened the door cautiously, accepting the folded paper with a murmured thanks. Closing the door, she broke the seal and read the brief message. "Opportunity remains. Stop final chance. Stop noon stage, carrying special item stop." No signature, but the implication was clear enough. Someone knew who she was and what she had planned. Was it Mrs. Astor, playing some deeper game, or someone else entirely? Lizzie crumpled the telegram, then smoothed it out again, reading it a second time. The special item could only be the mining payroll, but why alert her? Who would benefit from her robbing the stage? It made no sense unless it was a trap. The prudent course was clear. Ignore the telegram and leave Copper Creek immediately. Yet something held her back. Curiosity, pride, or perhaps the strange reluctance she'd felt since arriving in this mountain town, a reluctance to return to the solitary, rootless existence she'd known these past years. She crossed to the window, gazing out at the awakening town. Shopkeepers swept boardwalks, children raced toward the schoolhouse, and across the street, Sheriff Calloway emerged from his office, pinning his badge to his vest with practiced ease. Even from this distance, she could see the glint of silver as he checked his pocket watch before tucking it away. That watch. Something about it tugged at her memory. During their brief encounters, he'd checked it several times. An unconscious habit, seemingly, but the way his fingers caressed the case spoke of sentimental value rather than mere timekeeping. A wild idea began forming in her mind. One last robbery, not of the mining payroll, but of something far more personal. The sheriff's watch would fetch a handsome price, yes, but more importantly, it would serve as a fitting farewell performance for the Phantom. To steal from the very man hunting her, what better final chapter to her notorious career? Logic argued against such recklessness, but Lizzie had long ago learned that sometimes the boldest move was the safest. No one would expect the Phantom to target the sheriff himself rather than the tempting payroll. Besides, she'd already decided to leave the territory. Why not depart with one last audacious achievement? Decision made, she finished packing, leaving out only what she'd need for her final performance. Across town, Wade Calloway sat at his desk, reviewing the plan for tomorrow's stage with Deputy Miller and 2 hired guards from the mining company. "You'll ride point," he instructed the more experienced guard, a grizzled veteran named Harkins. "Miller, you and Jensen will follow about 200 yards back. Don't show yourselves unless necessary." "And you'll be inside the coach," Miller confirmed, his young face serious. "Dressed as a mining company representative," Wade nodded. "When we reach Devil's Curve, I'll make a show of checking my watch. That's the signal to be ready." Harkins frowned. "You really think this ghost will hit a coach with armed guards?" "The Phantom has a pattern, scouts the route, studies the shipment, chooses the perfect moment." Wade traced the map spread across his desk. "Devil's Curve provides cover for approach. The sun will be in the driver's eyes, and there's a ravine perfect for a quick escape." "Seems like you think like an outlaw yourself, Sheriff," Jensen remarked with a nervous laugh. Wade didn't smile. "To catch a thief, you need to understand how they think." He dismissed the men with final instructions, then settled back in his chair, turning his attention to a stack of wanted posters. The door opened, admitting his sister Rebecca, her arms full of books for her schoolhouse. "Plotting the downfall of your ghost?" she asked, eyeing the papers strewn across his desk. "Just finalizing details." He rose to help her with her burden. "What brings you by?" Can't a sister check on her stubborn brother before he does something foolish? She set the books down with a sigh. I've been thinking about Father's watch. I don't like you using it as bait. Wade's expression softened. It'll be fine, Becca. I'll keep it secure. It's not just a watch, Wade. It's the last thing we have of him. Which is exactly why I need it tomorrow. The Phantom has a weakness for sentimental items. He drew the silver timepiece from his pocket. Trust me, this will work. Rebecca touched the watch gently. Just be careful. I've already lost one Calloway to Outlaw's bullet, and you won't lose another, he promised, kissing her forehead. Now don't you have young minds to educate? After Rebecca departed, Wade returned to his preparations, unaware that across town, Elizabeth Harrington was making preparations of her own. The noon stage departed with a crack of the whip and a cloud of dust. Among its passengers was Lizzie, dressed not as the Phantom, but as Miss Hart, respectable seamstress. She'd chosen this particular stage carefully. Its route would take it past several of the locations she'd previously scouted for the payroll robbery, giving her one last chance to study the terrain. More importantly, the stage would return to Copper Creek by late afternoon, allowing her time to prepare for her evening encounter with Sheriff Calloway. She had observed him long enough to know his habits. Each evening around dusk, he made a final patrol of the town before returning to his small house on the edge of Copper Creek. It was during that walk that she would strike, quick, precise, then vanished into the gathering darkness. By morning, she would be miles away, leaving behind nothing but the legend of how the Phantom had stolen the sheriff's prized possession from under his nose. The stage rattled along mountain roads, passengers swaying with its motion. Beside Lizzie sat an elderly woman knitting. Across from them, a young miner and a traveling preacher engaged in theological debate. Normal people living normal lives, she thought with a pang of something like envy. As the coach rounded a particularly sharp bend, Lizzie glanced out the window, studying the terrain. This was Devil's Curve, the perfect ambush point. The thought had barely formed when the stage jerked to a sudden halt, sending passengers lurching forward. What's happening? The elderly woman asked, clutching her knitting. Probably just a fallen tree or rock slide, Lizzie assured her, even as her hand moved instinctively to her hidden derringer. Something felt wrong. The stage door flew open, and Lizzie found herself staring into the barrel of a revolver. Behind it stood a masked figure in a long coat, a mirror image of her own phantom disguise. "Nobody move," the figure growled. "This is a robbery." For one disorienting moment, Lizzie thought she was looking at herself, or rather at her alter ego. The slouch hat pulled low, the oversized coat, the bandana masking the lower face, all perfect mimicry of the Phantom's signature appearance. But the voice was unmistakably male, rough with barely contained excitement. An imposter, someone trading on her reputation. Watches, jewelry, money, all of it in the bag, the false Phantom demanded, tossing a burlap sack to the preacher. "And make it quick." The elderly woman beside Lizzie whimpered, fumbling with a worn wedding band. The young miner looked ready to fight until the gun barrel swung in his direction. The preacher, pale but composed, began collecting valuables. Lizzie kept her head down, mind racing. This wasn't just coincidence. Someone had deliberately copied her methods, her disguise, but why? To frame her for a more violent crime? Or simply to capitalize on the fear her name inspired? When the preacher reached her, Lizzie reluctantly surrendered a modest brooch, nothing valuable, but enough to avoid suspicion. She kept the derringer hidden. Whatever was happening, she needed to understand it before acting. "Hurry up," the imposter barked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. That nervousness struck Lizzie as odd. The real Phantom, herself, was always calm, methodical. This man was agitated, almost panicked. As the preacher finished his grim collection and handed over the sack, Lizzie caught a glimpse of the robber's eyes through the narrow gap in his disguise. They were ordinary brown, unremarkable except for the fear that widened them, not the cool confidence of an experienced outlaw. "Now keep quiet and count to 100 before moving," the fake phantom instructed, backing away from the stage. "Anyone follows, they'll get a bullet." He disappeared around the bend, and seconds later, they heard the pounding of horse hooves fading into distance. "Everyone all right?" the driver called down, his rifle at the ready but too late to be useful. "Shaken but unhurt," the preacher replied. "It was the phantom." The miner spat disgustedly. "Didn't seem so ghostly to me. Just a common thief." Lizzie remained silent, troubled by what she'd witnessed. This robbery had none of her careful planning or precise execution. It was crude, desperate, the work of an amateur. The stage resumed its journey, passengers subdued by their ordeal. Lizzie stared out the window, plans unraveling in her mind. Her intended final performance was now compromised. With a copycat operating in the area, security would be doubled, the sheriff even more vigilant. She had no choice but to abandon her scheme and leave Copper Creek immediately. The thought left her strangely hollow. By the time the stage rolled into town, news of the robbery had somehow preceded them. A small crowd gathered, and Sheriff Calloway himself stood waiting, his tall figure unmistakable among the townsfolk. As passengers disembarked, recounting their ordeal, Lizzie attempted to slip away unnoticed. She had nearly reached the corner when a deep voice stopped her. "Miss Hart, a moment of your time, please." She turned to find Sheriff Calloway approaching, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Up close, he was even more imposing, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped with a face weathered by sun and responsibility. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. "How may I help you?" "I understand you were on the stage that was robbed." His blue eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. "I'd like to hear your account of what happened." "I'm afraid I wasn't much help," she demurred. "It happened so quickly, and I kept my head down as instructed. Still, you might have noticed details others missed. My office is just across the street." It wasn't a request. With resignation, Lizzie followed him, acutely aware of the derringer hidden in her pocket and the irony of her situation, the phantom voluntarily entering a sheriff's office. The interior was surprisingly tidy, with wanted posters arranged neatly on one wall and a gun rack behind the desk. A pot of coffee simmered on a small stove in the corner. "Coffee?" he offered, gesturing to a chair. "No, thank you." Lizzie sat cautiously, maintaining the demure posture expected of Elizabeth Hart, seamstress. The sheriff settled behind his desk, removing his hat to reveal dark hair with a touch of silver at the temples. "Tell me what you saw." Lizzie described the robbery in deliberately vague terms, careful to include only what any passenger might have observed. Throughout her account, Calloway watched her with those penetrating eyes, occasionally jotting notes. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Interesting, your description matches the others except for one detail." He tapped his pencil against the desk. "You mentioned the robber seemed nervous, unlike previous accounts of the phantom." She cursed herself for the slip. "Did I? I wouldn't know about previous robberies." "No?" He smiled slightly. "You seem well informed for someone new to the territory." "One hears things," she replied carefully. "The phantom seems something of a local legend." "Indeed." He pulled open a drawer and withdrew a folder. "A legend that's cost good people their valuables and the stage company a fortune in lost business." He spread several sketches before her, crude renderings of a masked figure. "This is the phantom as described by previous victims." Lizzie studied the drawings of herself with detached curiosity. None captured her accurately, for which she was grateful. Today's robbery was different. Calloway continued. Sloppier, according to witnesses, almost as if someone were impersonating the original. Lizzie finished, unable to resist. His eyebrows rose. Exactly. Which suggests our ghost might have competition, or an apprentice. Or perhaps the real phantom wasn't involved at all, she ventured. Perhaps someone saw an opportunity to commit a crime and blame it on a notorious figure. Perhaps. The sheriff's gaze was uncomfortably perceptive. The question is, why now? And why here when we're expecting a valuable shipment tomorrow? Lizzie's pulse quickened. What shipment is that? The mining payroll. He watched her reaction closely. Normally we wouldn't discuss such matters, but since it's common knowledge in town, she understood now. The sheriff was fishing, using the robbery as pretext to gauge her interest in the payroll. Did he suspect her, or was this merely routine questioning? Well, she said, rising from her chair, I've told you everything I know, which isn't much. If that's all, just one more thing, Miss Hart. He stood circling the desk with casual grace that belied his size. May I see your hands? The request caught her off guard. My hands? Humor me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Slowly, Lizzie removed her gloves, extending her hands for inspection. The sheriff took them gently in his own, turning them palm up. His touch sent an unexpected shiver up her arms. Beautiful hands, he remarked. Not what I'd expect from a seamstress. Before she could respond, he released her and stepped back. Thank you for your time, Miss Hart. Please remain in town for the next few days, in case I have further questions. It was a dismissal and a warning combined. As Lizzie left the sheriff's office, she felt his gaze following her, heavy as a physical touch. He suspected something, not enough to arrest her, but enough to watch her closely. Her plans to rob him of his watch now seemed not just foolhardy but impossible, yet the alternative, slinking away from Copper Creek without a final triumph, was equally unpalatable. Twilight settled over Copper Creek, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. In her room at the Wayfarers Inn, Lizzie paced like a caged wildcat, weighing her dwindling options. The sheriff's instruction to remain in town complicated matters enormously. If she fled now, she might as well wear a sign proclaiming her guilt. Yet staying meant risk. The risk of discovery, of jail, of facing those penetrating blue eyes across iron bars instead of a wooden desk. Those eyes troubled her more than she cared to admit, seeing too much, missing too little. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Tensing, she reached for her derringer before calling, "Who is it?" "Mrs. Astor," came the reply, low and urgent. Cautiously, Lizzie opened the door. The widow swept in without invitation, her usual composure fractured by obvious agitation. "You were questioned by the sheriff," she stated, removing her gloves with sharp, angry movements. "News travels quickly in small towns," Lizzie observed, closing the door. "He wanted my account of the stage robbery." "A robbery committed by the Phantom while you were a passenger?" Mrs. Astor's voice dripped with accusation. "You promised to leave Copper Creek, not draw attention with more crimes." "It wasn't me," Lizzie replied evenly. "Someone is impersonating the Phantom." Mrs. Astor stilled. An imposter, who would dare? Someone desperate or foolish. The work was sloppy, nothing like... Lizzie caught herself, but too late. "Nothing like your usual precision?" Mrs. Astor finished dryly. "Your professional pride is showing, my dear." Lizzie moved to the window, watching as Sheriff Calloway emerged from his office for his evening rounds. The timing is suspicious. Tomorrow's stage carries the mining payroll, a tempting target that's suddenly become more dangerous with increased security. You think someone is setting a trap for you? Or clearing the way for their own robbery by drawing attention elsewhere? Lizzie turned from the window. Either way, I need to leave tonight before the sheriff's suspicions solidify. Mrs. Astor fingered the cameo at her throat. her expression calculating. Perhaps not. This imposter presents an opportunity. What do you mean? If the real Phantom were to help catch this fraud, it might complicate the sheriff's investigation, create doubt about other robberies. The suggestion hung in the air between them, audacious and tempting. Lizzie studied the older woman with new appreciation for her devious mind. You're suggesting I help catch my own copycat? I'm suggesting you protect your legacy, Mrs. Astor replied smoothly, and possibly save innocent lives. This new Phantom seems far less principled about violence than you. Lizzie considered the proposal. It was foolhardy, yes, but also elegant in its irony. If she could identify the imposter, she might indeed cast doubt on previous Phantom robberies, creating confusion about her own crimes. How would I even begin? She asked, not quite rejecting the idea. Mrs. Astor smiled thinly. Start by discovering who knew about the payroll shipment and who might benefit from stealing it. After the widow departed, Lizzie sat at the small writing desk, methodically listing what she knew. The fake Phantom had targeted a regular stage rather than waiting for the more valuable payroll. That suggested opportunism rather than careful planning, or perhaps a test run for tomorrow's bigger heist. What troubled her most was the timing of the telegram she'd received that morning. Had it been sent to lure her onto that specific stage? If so, the sender knew her identity and wanted her implicated in today's robbery. The pieces weren't fitting together, but one thing was clear. Someone in Copper Creek was playing a dangerous game, and she was a central piece on their board. Sheriff Wade Calloway completed his evening rounds with a troubled mind. The stage robbery didn't fit the Phantom's established pattern. It was messy, hurried, the work of an amateur rather than the meticulous ghost who had eluded capture for months. His thoughts turned to Elizabeth Hart. There was something about the seamstress that nagged at him. Her too perfect composure, the intelligence behind those changeable green eyes, the hands too smooth for someone who worked with needle and thread. Approaching his modest house on the edge of town, Wade paused, sensing something amiss. The front door stood slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered locking it that morning. Drawing his revolver, he pushed the door open with his boot, scanning the darkened interior. Nothing seemed disturbed in the front room, but a flicker of movement from his bedroom caught his eye. "Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them," he commanded, voice hard as iron. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young man barely out of his teens, dressed in clothes too large for his skinny frame. In his hand was a familiar object, a wide-brimmed hat identical to the one witnesses described the Phantom wearing. "Tommy Burke?" Wade lowered his gun slightly, recognizing the stable hand from the livery. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" Sorry, Sheriff," the young man stammered, his face pale with fear. I was looking for..." "For what?" Wade advanced, noticing a bulge in Tommy's jacket. "Empty your pockets, now." Trembling, Tommy produced several items: a bandana, a pair of gloves, and most damning of all, a crude hand-drawn map of tomorrow's stage route with Devil's Curve clearly marked. Understanding dawned. "You're the one who robbed the noon stage today." Tommy's face crumpled. "I needed the money. Ma's sick and the doctor costs more than I make in 3 months." "So you decided to become the Phantom?" Wade holstered his gun, disgusted. "You could have gotten yourself killed, boy." "I wasn't gonna hurt nobody," Tommy protested, "just like the real Phantom never does." Wade's eyes narrowed. "And how do you know so much about how the real Phantom operates?" Tommy looked away, guilt written across his youthful features. "Everyone knows, and I might have heard things working at the stables." "Heard things from who?" "Just travelers talking, and once a fancy lady asking questions about valuable shipments." Tommy swallowed hard. "She paid me to find out about the mining payroll." Wade's instincts sharpened. "What lady? When?" About 2 weeks ago, real proper-like, older, said her name was Mrs. Astor. The name registered immediately. Marguerite Astor, the widow who had arrived in town around the same time as Elizabeth Hart. Wade filed this connection away, though its significance remained unclear. "What were you looking for in my house, Tommy?" The young man hung his head. "Your silver watch. Everyone knows you carry it. Thought if I took it, folks would believe I was the real Phantom." Wade felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. His father's watch, the same one he planned to use as bait tomorrow. "You're under arrest, Tommy," he said quietly, "but we're going to have a long talk about this Mrs. Astor and anyone else who might be involved." As he escorted the would-be outlaw to jail, Wade's thoughts returned to Elizabeth Hart and her seemingly coincidental arrival in Copper Creek. The pieces were beginning to align in a pattern he didn't like, one that suggested tomorrow's stage might face danger from more than one direction. Dawn broke over Copper Creek with tendrils of mist curling between buildings, as if the town itself were haunted. In the small jailhouse, Tommy Burke huddled on a narrow cot, his youthful face creased with fear and regret. Across from him, Sheriff Calloway leaned against the bars, his expression more weary than angry. "Let's try again," Wade said patiently. "This Mrs. Astor, exactly what did she ask you to find out?" Tommy twisted his cap in nervous hands. "Just stage schedules at first. Which ones carried money or valuables? Then she got real interested in the mining payroll." "And you didn't find this suspicious?" "Course I did." Tommy's voice cracked. "But she paid good, $5 just for talking. Ma needs medicine and I—" He trailed off miserably. Wade nodded, understanding the desperate arithmetic of poverty. Did Mrs. Astor ever mention a Miss Hart, the new seamstress in town? Tommy frowned, considering. "Don't think so, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" "They came to town around the same time. Sometimes I'd see them talking, not friendly-like, more serious. Thought maybe they knew each other from before." Wade filed this information away. The connection between Hart and Astor was growing clearer, though its exact nature remained elusive. "One more thing," he said. "Why my house? Why my watch specifically?" Tommy looked embarrassed. "Everyone knows it was your paws. Figure if I took something personal, folks would believe the Phantom was real serious." Wade's jaw tightened. The watch had become a target not just because of its value, but because of what it represented. Tommy's amateur attempt had failed, but would a more experienced thief be deterred? "Get some rest," he told Tommy. "Deputy Miller will bring you breakfast later." Outside, the town was stirring to life. Shopkeepers raised awnings, the blacksmith's forge glowed with morning fire, and stagecoach passengers gathered for the day's departures. Wade spotted Rebecca leaving the general store, her arms full of supplies for the schoolhouse. "You look terrible," she observed as he approached to help with her packages. "Didn't you sleep?" "Had an unexpected guest in my home last night," he replied, briefly explaining Tommy's attempted burglary. Rebecca's expression darkened. "He was after Father's watch. Wade, I told you." "It's fine. Nothing was taken." He guided her toward the schoolhouse. "But I need a favor. Could you visit Mrs. Astor today? Perhaps invite her to tea, make conversation about her background, her reasons for coming to Copper Creek." "You suspect her of something?" "Let's just say I'm curious about her interest in stage schedules and valuable shipments." Rebecca studied her brother's face. "And what about Miss Hart? The whole town's talking about how you questioned her yesterday." Wade's expression revealed nothing. "Miss Hart is an enigma." "A pretty enigma," Rebecca remarked with sisterly insight. "I've seen how you look at her." "My interest is purely professional," Wade insisted, though the slight flush beneath his tan suggested otherwise. "Of course it is." Rebecca smiled knowingly. "Well, I'll speak with Mrs. Astor, but be careful, Wade. Father always said the most dangerous animal isn't the one that charges, but the one that watches and waits. At the Wayfarer's Inn, Lizzie sat beside her window, observing the street below with a thief's careful attention. She had spent a restless night considering Mrs. Astor's suggestion, weighing risks against potential benefits. By dawn, she had formulated a plan, audacious, perhaps even foolhardy, but potentially effective. If someone was impersonating the Phantom and framing her, the best defense was to discover their identity before the sheriff did, and the surest way to catch a thief was to use the right bait. The challenge was determining what that bait might be. The mining payroll was the obvious target, but after yesterday's robbery, security would be doubled. No, she needed something else, something valuable enough to tempt a thief, but accessible enough to create an opportunity. Her gaze followed Sheriff Calloway as he escorted his sister toward the schoolhouse. Even from a distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. What had Tommy Burke said during their encounter at the stage office? Sheriff Calloway's made catching this ghost his personal mission. Personal. The word echoed in her mind, connecting with Mrs. Astor's advice to protect her legacy. What if the copycat wasn't after the payroll at all? What if their true target was something far more personal? The sheriff's pocket watch. Tommy's desperate attempt to steal it suddenly made perfect sense. The silver timepiece was valuable, yes, but more importantly, it was meaningful to the sheriff. Taking it would be a direct challenge to his authority, a symbolic victory over the man hunting the Phantom. A plan began forming in Lizzie's mind. If she could anticipate where and when the imposter would strike next, she might catch them in the act, and in doing so, cast doubt on her own involvement in previous robberies. But first, she needed to confirm her suspicions. Donning her simplest dress and bonnet, she made her way to the livery stable where Tommy Burke worked. The stablemaster, a gruff man with permanently hay-dusted clothing, eyed her suspiciously as she approached. "Tommy ain't here," he announced before she could speak. "Sheriff took him in last night. Fool boy tried to rob the stage yesterday. Can you believe it?" "How terrible," Lizzie replied, feigning surprise. "I only wanted to ask about hiring a horse. I need to visit a friend outside town." The stablemaster's demeanor softened slightly at the prospect of business. "Where you headed?" "The old Morrison place, about 5 miles west." It was a gamble. She had overheard the name mentioned in town, but knew little about the location. "Out by Devil's Creek?" The stablemaster scratched his chin. "Road's not good for a lady alone, especially with that Phantom still about." "Oh, but I thought they caught him, Tommy Burke, you said." The stablemaster snorted. "Tommy playing dress-up ain't the real Phantom, miss. Sheriff knows that too, I reckon. The real ghost's still out there." Lizzie allowed concern to cross her features. "Perhaps I should reconsider my journey." "Might be wise," he agreed, "especially with all the excitement today. Mining payroll's coming through, whole town's talking about it. Sheriff's riding shotgun himself, I hear." This confirmed what she already suspected. Despite Tommy's arrest, the payroll shipment was proceeding as scheduled, which meant Sheriff Calloway still believed the real Phantom might make an attempt. She thanked the stablemaster and departed, her mind working through possibilities. If the sheriff was personally guarding the payroll, his home would be empty and vulnerable. The perfect opportunity for someone to steal his prized pocket watch. Unless, of course, the sheriff had anticipated this and was using the payroll as a diversion while setting a different kind of trap. The game was growing more complex, layers of deception folding upon themselves, like the mountain ridges surrounding Copper Creek. Lizzie had always prided herself on staying one step ahead, but now she found herself unsure of the ground beneath her feet, and increasingly certain that Sheriff Wade Calloway was a more formidable opponent than any she had faced before. Noon approached with the inexorability of Judgment Day. The Copper Creek stage office bustled with unusual activity as final preparations for the payroll shipment were completed. 2 armed guards from the mining company checked their rifles, speaking in low voices about the infamous Phantom and the boy who had tried to imitate him. Sheriff Wade Calloway emerged from his office dressed not in his usual attire, but in the fine clothes of a mining company representative. A perfect disguise for anyone expecting to spot the law by his badge or distinctive hat. Only the familiar silver watch chain across his vest hinted at his true identity. Deputy Miller approached nervously. "Everything's ready, Sheriff. Jensen and Harkins are mounted and waiting at the edge of town." Wade nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd gathered around the stage. Most were ordinary townsfolk going about their business, but experience had taught him that danger often wore the most benign faces. "Any sign of our friends?" he asked quietly. Miller understood the oblique reference. "Mrs. Astor is taking tea with your sister at the schoolhouse. Miss Hart was seen at the general store about an hour ago buying thread. Nobody's left town." "Good." Wade checked his father's watch one final time before boarding the stage. The silver timepiece gleamed in the midday sun, too conspicuously perhaps, but that was the point. Bait needed to be visible to attract predators. As the stage pulled away from Copper Creek, Wade settled into his role, exchanging pleasantries with the other passengers. A traveling salesman returning from Silver Junction and an elderly couple visiting their daughter. None would suspect the well-dressed mining representative of being the sheriff, nor that the wooden strongbox beneath his seat contained only a fraction of the actual payroll. The rest had been sent ahead at dawn via an alternate route. "Lovely timepiece," the elderly gentleman remarked, nodding toward Wade's watch. "Family heirloom." "My father's," Wade replied truthfully, "and his father's before him." "Best kind of treasure," the old man agreed. "Not for its value, but for its meaning." Wade nodded, wondering if the Phantom, whether the original or the copycat, understood the difference between mere theft and taking something irreplaceable. He doubted it. In his experience, outlaws rarely considered the true cost of their actions. The stage rumbled toward Devil's Curve, and Wade felt the familiar sharpening of his senses that preceded danger. His hand moved casually to rest near his concealed revolver, ready. Across town, Lizzie Hart slipped out the back of the general store, having successfully planted the story that she would be occupied with sewing for the remainder of the day. Instead, she made her way toward the sheriff's modest house on the edge of town. Her mind settled on a daring plan. If her suspicions were correct, someone would attempt to steal the sheriff's watch today, but not from the stage. Tommy Burke's failed burglary suggested the real target was the watch itself, not as part of a larger robbery, but as a specific trophy. And with Sheriff Calloway riding shotgun on the payroll shipment, his home would be unguarded. Lizzie intended to catch the thief in the act, thereby proving her own innocence, at least in this particular crime. It was a desperate gamble, but she was running out of options. As she approached the sheriff's house, she noticed something that confirmed her suspicions. The back door stood slightly ajar. Someone was already inside. Drawing her derringer, Lizzie moved silently toward the entrance, years of experience guiding her movements. Through the gap in the doorway, she could hear someone rummaging through drawers, muttering in frustration. She pushed the door open with deliberate slowness, gun raised. "Looking for something?" The figure at the bureau spun around, and Lizzie found herself staring at Marguerite Astor. The widow's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her elegant hands covered by men's gloves too large for her slender fingers. "Miss Hart," Mrs. Astor said with remarkable composure for someone caught burglarizing a sheriff's home. "Or should I say, Elizabeth Harrington, the famous Phantom?" "You already knew who I was," Lizzie replied, keeping her derringer steady. "What I don't understand is why you're here. You have your husband's watch back. What more do you want?" Mrs. Astor's laugh held no humor. "You think this was ever about James's watch? My dear, you're more naive than I thought." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're behind the copycat. You sent Tommy Burke to rob the stage, and to attempt stealing the sheriff's watch. The boy was merely a pawn, Mrs. Astor acknowledged. Useful for creating confusion about your activities. After all, if there's evidence of a fake phantom, then all the robberies might be attributed to copycats, Lizzie finished. But why frame me at all? Our agreement was never going to end with you simply leaving town, Mrs. Astor interrupted. You're too dangerous, Miss Harrington. You know my identity, my connection to your father's business. The pieces suddenly aligned in Lizzie's mind. You were more than my mother's school friend, weren't you? Your husband, James Astor, was one of the investors who ruined my father. Business, my dear, nothing personal. Mrs. Astor's expression hardened. But when I recognized you in Silver Junction, I realized you might eventually recognize me too. I couldn't risk that, especially given your new profession. So you engineered this elaborate scheme, Lizzie said with reluctant admiration. Convinced me to come to Copper Creek, arranged the robbery telegram, even sent Tommy to attempt stealing the sheriff's watch, all to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. The perfect solution, Mrs. Astor agreed. The real phantom caught and hanged, while I walk away with this. She held up Sheriff Calloway's silver watch, somehow acquired despite Tommy's failed attempt. The final evidence to ensure your conviction. Lizzie's mind raced. But the sheriff is wearing his watch. I saw it myself this morning. Mrs. Astor smiled thinly. A replica. Wade Calloway is too clever to risk his precious family heirloom as bait. The real watch was hidden here. Until now. The revelation stunned Lizzie. The sheriff had anticipated not just an attempt on the stage, but on his home as well. He had prepared for both. Yet somehow Mrs. Astor had still managed to find the genuine article. How did you know? Lizzie demanded. Rebecca Calloway is remarkably forthcoming when sharing tea with a sympathetic widow. She was quite concerned about her brother using their father's watch as bait, worried enough to reveal where he had hidden the real one for safekeeping. The sheriff's modest home became a battleground of wits as the two women faced each other, the elegant widow clutching a silver pocket watch, and the seamstress who was not truly a seamstress, her derringer unwavering. What happens now? Lizzie asked, though she already knew the answer. Mrs. Astor's smile was cold. Now I leave with this watch. By the time Sheriff Calloway returns, he'll find you here, caught in the act, the notorious phantom, finally unmasked. And if I shoot you? Then you'll hang for murder instead of theft, Mrs. Astor replied calmly. Either way, you've reached the end of your performance, my dear. Lizzie knew the older woman was right. Shooting would only worsen her situation, yet allowing Mrs. Astor to leave with the sheriff's prized possession, his father's legacy, was equally unthinkable. You won't get away with this, Lizzie said, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. I already have. Mrs. Astor moved toward the door, the watch chain dangling from her gloved fingers. Your father would be so disappointed, Elizabeth. All that fine education, that privileged upbringing, reduced to common thievery. The mention of her father stung like a physical blow. My father was destroyed by men like your husband, men who built fortunes on the ruins of others' lives. The weak fall so the strong may rise, Mrs. Astor replied without remorse. That's the natural order of things. Outside, hoofbeats approached rapidly, not the steady rhythm of the returning stagecoach, but the urgent gallop of a single rider. Both women tensed, their confrontation interrupted by this unexpected development. The front door burst open, revealing Sheriff Wade Calloway, dust-covered and grim. His sharp eyes took in the scene instantly. Mrs. Astor with the silver watch, Lizzie with her small derringer, the evidence of searching scattered across his home. Sheriff, Mrs. Astor recovered first, her voice pitched to perfection. Thank heavens you've returned. I came to speak with your sister and found this woman ransacking your home. Wade's penetrating gaze moved from Mrs. Astor to Lizzie, then back again. His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver, but he made no move to draw it. "Is that so?" he asked quietly. "Then perhaps you can explain why you're wearing men's gloves, Mrs. Astor, and why my father's watch is in your possession rather than Miss Hart's." The widow's composure faltered momentarily. "She must have passed it to me when she heard you arriving." "Unlikely," Wade interrupted, "considering I watched you through the window for nearly a minute before entering." He extended his hand. "The watch, if you please." Realizing her deception had failed, Mrs. Astor's demeanor transformed. The refined widow vanished, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "This woman is the Phantom, the thief who's been robbing stages for months. I was merely trying to help you catch her." "By breaking into my home and stealing my father's watch?" Wade raised an eyebrow. "An unusual method of assistance." Lizzie watched the exchange in confusion. "How did you know to return? The stage?" "Never left the outskirts of town," Wade explained, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Astor. "After speaking with Tommy Burke this morning, I had Deputy Miller follow Mrs. Astor. When she headed toward my house instead of meeting my sister as arranged, I knew something was wrong." Mrs. Astor's hand moved suddenly, reaching beneath her skirts. Wade's revolver appeared as if conjured from air, trained steadily on the widow. "I wouldn't," he advised calmly. With visible reluctance, Mrs. Astor withdrew her hand empty and placed the silver watch on a nearby table. "You're a fool, Sheriff. The woman beside you is a thief and a fraud, Elizabeth Harrington. Or haven't you made that connection yet?" "Elizabeth Harrington," Wade repeated, glancing briefly at Lizzie. "Daughter of Jonathan Harrington, ruined in the Great Northwestern Railroad collapse, presumed lost to society after her parents' deaths." His mouth curved slightly. "Also suspected of being the Phantom, though proof has been elusive." The revelation stunned Lizzie. He had known, perhaps not her identity specifically, but enough to suspect her. Yet he had never confronted her directly, never arrested her despite his suspicions. "If you knew," she began hesitantly, "why didn't you—" "Arrest you?" Wade shook his head slightly. "Suspicion isn't proof, Miss Harrington. Besides, there were inconsistencies in your case that troubled me." "Such as?" Mrs. Astor interjected with obvious disdain. "Such as why a thief who never harmed her victims would suddenly inspire copycats willing to use violence," Wade replied. "Or why she would return to a town where she'd already committed a robbery, risking identification." He holstered his revolver but maintained his vigilant posture. "After Tommy's attempt to steal my watch, I began to wonder if someone was trying to frame the Phantom or expose her." Lizzie lowered her derringer, the pieces falling into place. "That's why you announced the payroll shipment so publicly. You weren't trying to catch me. You were flushing out whoever was trying to set me up." "Partly," Wade acknowledged, though catching the real Phantom remained a priority. Mrs. Astor laughed bitterly. "How touching. The sheriff and the thief working together to solve a mystery. And what happens now, Sheriff? Will you arrest us both? Or perhaps just me, while your pretty criminal goes free?" "That depends," Wade said, turning to face Lizzie fully, "on Miss Harrington's next decision." The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Lizzie felt something shifting inside her, the hardened shell she had built around herself since her parents' deaths, cracking under the steady gaze of this remarkable man. "I did it," she admitted quietly. "I was the Phantom. 6 robberies across 3 counties, including the Silverton stage where I took James Astor's watch." She glanced at Mrs. Astor. "Though I never knew its sentimental value." Wade nodded, unsurprised by her confession. And now, the question contained multitudes, asking not just about her criminal past, but her future, her choices, her capacity for change. "Now I'm done," Lizzie said with finality. "The Phantom disappears for good." "That's not how justice works," Mrs. Astor protested. "She's confessed to multiple robberies." "Indeed," Wade agreed, picking up his father's watch from the table and examining it carefully for damage. "And restitution will need to be made. But justice isn't always served by a hangman's noose, especially when circumstances are complex." He looked at Lizzie again, something softening in his expression. The mining company might be satisfied with the return of property rather than prosecution, particularly if the thief were to assist in recovering other stolen items. "A deal?" Mrs. Astor was incredulous. "You're offering her a deal while arresting me?" "I'm arresting you for breaking and entering, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit robbery by manipulating Tommy Burke," Wade clarified. "Your connection to previous stage robberies remains to be investigated." The following week passed in a whirlwind of revelations and resolutions. Mrs. Astor was held in the Copper Creek jail pending transfer to the territorial court, her elaborate scheme to frame Lizzie while eliminating a witness to her husband's financial crimes unraveling completely under investigation. For Lizzie, each day brought both atonement and possibility. She worked tirelessly with Sheriff Calloway to document her past robberies and arrange for stolen items to be recovered or reimbursed. The mining company, eager to avoid scandal and recover their property, proved surprisingly amenable to Wade's suggested arrangement. On a crisp autumn evening, Lizzie found herself on the porch of Wade's small house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. He joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Rebecca asks when you'll visit for dinner again," he said, passing her a steaming cup. "She's quite taken with you." "Even knowing who I was?" Lizzie asked, still marveling at the acceptance she'd found in Copper Creek. "Especially knowing who you are," Wade corrected gently. He drew his father's silver pocket watch from his vest, opening it to check the time. A habit she now understood was less about timekeeping than connection to memory. Impulsively, Lizzie reached out, her fingers brushing his as they touched the watch together. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing more in me than my mistakes." Wade's hand closed over hers, warm and steady. "We're more than our worst decisions, Lizzie." In that moment, with the setting sun gilding their joined hands over the silver watch that had brought them together, Lizzie Harrington found something she had thought forever lost. Not just redemption, but the promise of belonging. The Phantom had vanished, but Elizabeth remained, finally ready to step from shadows into light.